Anne, should we go ahead and get started?
Let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm Mike Kaniry. I'm a radio producer and host here at WGCU. We're happy to be partnering with Valerie's House to create conversations around grief and grieving. Many of you, hopefully most of you, have seen the new documentary called Speaking Grief, which we aired on TV on Sunday. It's also available for free online if you didn't get to see it then. We'll put a link to that on the website. I'm sure Anne can provide that. We're going to use it as a sort of jumping off point this evening. We're joined primarily by Angela Melvin. She's founder and CEO of Valerie's House. Angela, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
And everybody, just please keep yourself muted if you wouldn't mind. And if you have questions, just type them in the chat box and they'll pop up here and then we can bring them into the conversation. So let's just get started talking about this documentary a little bit for starters. Angela, what did you think about it? I just finished watching it.
Yes, thank you so much, and happy to see so many faces on here. And just a quick little note, if you want to push speaker view at the top right-hand corner, that way whoever's speaking will come up and you don't see so many boxes at once, so it's up to you. WGCU hosting this for us tonight, and really neat. I've never done one like this where we get to see all of the audience as well, so that just makes it so much more personal, and the topic, of course, is so personal and scary for a lot of people to want to even go there, really. Scary to ask for help, scary to walk in the doors here at Valerie's House. We had a parent and a child come last night who turned around. They were on their way to a group night and turned around. So that often still happens. There's a lot of pain involved when you lose someone, and that's what we're here to talk about. And I think the documentary, for those who haven't watched it, it is still available online for free. It's really a special it's a special, I think, portrayal. It's very touching. Jessica, one of our Valerie's House moms who's on with us tonight, and Story and I have been talking about this, and it really kind of simplifies what we go through as grievers, but also reminds people that it's still an unknown in many, many ways of how to really help someone through this. There are never really any black and white answers. I think for many in the field, I see Dave on here from New Hope in Orlando, who's been doing this his entire life, 30-something years, and may admit, there's just still a lot we don't know. And I think that's because grief is so very personal and so very individual. It's so unique. And what might work for one person might not work for the next. But there are some things that we have learned over the years.
I think the reason that documentary, reason we're here today, stems from the idea that we live in a society that avoids grief. Where do you think that stems from? And is it universal, or is it something about our society?
Well, many of you may know my story. If not, I will share briefly. My name is Angela Melvin. I'm the founder of an organization, a small nonprofit in Fort Myers, Florida, the southwest coast of Florida on the Gulf of Mexico, called Valerie's House. And it's an actual house. It's a home away from home. I'm actually sitting in one of the rooms right now. And the families come here to Valerie's House to grieve and heal and connect together. So they are not alone. They don't live here. It's more about a sense of community and a sense of support. And my mother died in 1987 in a car accident here in Fort Myers, and there wasn't anything available for my family back in those years. And in fact, it wasn't until very recently that there really was support and conversation for grieving children, especially. And so that's what Valerie's House does. We're one of hundreds of centers around the country that do this, but the concept is getting people talking about it, and that we realize that really the best thing you can do for someone who's grieving is just be a listener. And sometimes you don't know what the person is going through unless you've walked it yourself. And that's why something like Valerie's House and all of the other centers around the country who do this kind of work are so important, because it's bringing people together who have walked this journey and can show people that there is hope. And I'm an example of someone who's still standing 30-something years later after the loss of a parent as a child. And I'm there to tell families and share that you can get through this.
What's the, If you don't know what to say to somebody who's grieving, is it important to say that you don't know what to say, or how do you handle that?
Well, maybe we can ask Jessica Shishard, who's joining us. Jessica, do you want to introduce yourself and maybe answer that and share a little bit about your story?
Sure. Jessica Shishard. My husband died about a year and almost 9 months ago. And yeah, I would say being honest and saying, hey, I would like to do something, or I care about you and I don't know what to say, is probably better than assuming that you know and or pretending like it doesn't exist. I have 5 children, and my husband died in a truck accident. He was driving his work truck to work and got into an accident. And for us, our whole life flipped upside down. We actually lived in Nevada at the time and shortly moved to Florida about 2.5 months after he had passed away. And we were originally from Florida. We got married here, had our kids here, and ended up moving away for his job. So for us, finding Valerie's house was a godsend because there were no resources for us where we lived. My oldest son, who's now 12 at the time, actually was really upset about that and decided when he grew up, he was going to create a place where no kid would feel like an outcast. And then we found Valerie's house. Actually, my pediatrician recommended it, and he was like, Mom, this is exactly what I was talking about. Like, there's already one, And so for him, it was like a light bulb. Like, what he recognized that he needed in his life already existed. And we were so lucky to be able to be a part of it and honestly reap the benefits of what Angela put together for us.
What are the kinds of things that people did for you when you first started dealing with this? Or what are the things that you hoped or wished people would have done for you or with you when you first started dealing with this?
So I want to clarify right from the get-go, we had a lot of support. Most people don't have the amount of support that we had. We had church members coming over even before my children were aware that their father passed away, bringing us food and their condolences. We had friends flying in from Florida, from Utah to Nevada to help me plan the funeral and to be there with me and to help me with my kids. And then we had people dropping by gift cards. People were putting money in GoFundMes. Even like coming up to us in Walmart, just telling us that they love us and they care about us. We really genuinely had so much love and support, but most people don't. Most people don't have people that know what to do and to separate it. Most people tend to kind of have a lot of stuff at first, where you get the cards and you get the plants and you get the people coming to the funeral and maybe a couple casserole dishes, but then it kind of like stops after a time. And so I hear a lot of stories from other people at Valerie's house, and even in the documentary, they spoke about how there's a lot of love and comfort up front, but then it kind of trickles off as you go. So no, we really had a lot of people step up, and surprisingly enough, the people that I anticipated stepping up, some of them didn't, and some of them kind of disappeared, while other people who I never thought would stepped up, or people who we hadn't heard from in years ended up becoming our family. And so it's kind of strange how those things change once somebody close to you dies.
Can you talk just real briefly about, or not necessarily real briefly, but one of the things that came up in the conversation I had with Angela on the radio earlier today was about social media. We live in this world of, reminders of life and all these things. Can you just talk about how that must be difficult?
So as amazing as social media is, I am more of a private person. I tend to like to have things be in-house for me. And so I found that family members of ours had posted initially that my husband had died, and it was on social media. And so I was getting inboxes flooded with condolences and, what can I do? And I care about you and all this stuff, which sounds amazing. It genuinely sounds amazing that all these people stepped up and they were like, wow, I feel so terrible for you. Your husband was this great person. What can I do? But at the time I was so overwhelmed. I couldn't even look at it. Like, it took me until about a year later for me to actually go through all my emails and all my Facebook messages and all of that to really be able to read it. And even then it felt terrible having to like relive that all again. So on one hand, my sister-in-law specifically had posted that my husband had passed away, and that allowed people to know, because when he died, I called my mom, I called his mom, and then I was done. I couldn't handle anything at that point. And so by having family members step in and notify people through social media, it allowed people to make travel arrangements to come to the funeral and things like that. So on one hand, it's amazing because it's a great resource. On the other hand, for somebody like me who doesn't like being bombarded and doesn't like having my life be public, it felt very invasive. And even now I get these memories from last year about what we were going through or what other people were saying or what I was feeling at the time. And it almost brings all of that feelings and just challenge up for me again. Even if I'm feeling better that day, or if I'm feeling worse even, it'll just make it that much worse. So I guess it could go either way. Sorry if that doesn't really answer the question.
No, I just think, I mean, we're living in a whole new world with this stuff, and that's something that, you know, it may not seem like it's a part of our lives, but it really is a part of our lives. So I know there must be an intersection. One of the other things that came up in the conversation we had with Angela on the radio was, you know, asking a person who's lost somebody to remember a fond memory about them, even after asking that is really hard. Can you remember a fond memory of your husband?
Oh, absolutely. We've been very open. I think some people tend to shy away from talking about their loved one. My family, my kids and I, we are very open about him. We have pictures of him everywhere. We talk about him constantly. So I have a million fond memories of him. Are you asking me to share? I guess.
Yes, give us an
Okay,
example.
sorry. So I guess the one closest to his death, my oldest son got this humongous Lego set. It was like a carnival, had a big Ferris wheel and all this stuff. It was huge for Christmas. And so my husband and my son that received the gift, and then my younger son, sat at the table night after night. My husband would work 16-hour days. He would come home, we'd eat dinner, he'd shower, and then he'd sit down with the boys and build this massive Lego set. And they didn't finish it before he died. And so after he had passed away, one of his good friends finished it with him, and then we packaged it up when we moved, and we still have it intact to this day. So we're able to kind of keep the fun and the joy that the boys experienced with him on those last couple of nights.
I have I don't know if you can answer this, or if Angela can jump back in and answer this, or if this is an awkward question or not, but when I ask somebody when I'm interviewing them what their loved one's name was or is, you know, I mean, am I supposed to say, what is your husband's name? Because it didn't stop being his name. But, you know, that's just like a basic question I have. Is there a right answer to that?
No, I don't think so. I find that I still talk about him sometimes and as if he's alive, and it's kind of confusing for people, because then they'll be like, oh, what does your husband do? And I have to be like, oh, sorry, he's not here anymore. So I would say whatever you feel comfortable with. I find that when people are honest with their confusion about all of this, it just makes me feel more comfortable too.
What is your husband's name?
His name's Zach.
Zach. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Angela, we're going to pivot back to you. You know, there's a stigma attached to some different kinds of death, I think. A question that came in was, you know, is suicide grief different?
You know, I don't know. I think all grief is different. As we said, grief is individual, it's personal. Even if you lost the same person in your siblings, you're grieving different. Your experience is completely different in some cases. I think suicide absolutely carries with it a lot. How can it not? But I've also seen where a parent dies from cancer and children feel just as guilty as maybe the same child in group whose mom or dad might have taken their own life. The guilt and the shame is very common. Doesn't matter how they died. Sometimes we feel, what could we have done different? Or what was that conversation like? And those are things that you can carry your whole life. And those are some of the things that we talk about at Valerie's house.
Another question that we got prior to the beginning of this is, I would like to get ideas on how to get my kids to talk about their feelings about losing their grandparents. How much should I tell them in advance of Mimi and Poppy's death? When they are really sick, do we let them know as they're close to passing away? How do you approach that?
depends on the child. It depends on the kind of parent you are, and just really where your comfort level is with that kind of thing. Again, I don't think there's any right or wrong. I think honesty is always right, before and after the death of their special person. And I really there's lots of great little books. We have several here that are sweet and loving and comfortable and not scary for a child. Death can be very scary for kids, of course. But I think that as a parent, it's being very honest and realizing there's no right or wrong, and letting the children be part, of some of it too. If the person is dying, and depending on their age, allowing them to experience some of that. So instead of trying to shield them from everything, if that's what the child wants.
We're living through some, interesting times right now. There's a lot of tension in the world, a lot of tension in our society. We're dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, which is, causing people to lose their lives. Can you just talk about how that weight would play on a person who's grieving? Because it seems like, it's going to be the hardest thing you go through even during normal times. And now we're in, hard times.
Yeah. We've seen countless families who have lost someone during this time, some to COVID, many had nothing to do with COVID, but it's just a horrible time to have to say goodbye to someone, because oftentimes you can't. And oftentimes they're put in COVID units and COVID rooms for safety measures or to test, and then the person is not able to get anywhere close to them. And we have heard that in groups from some of the kids, and so no closure at all. But I know one of our Valerie's House teens is on the call too, Story. I don't know if she's still here, Story McDougal. Hi, Story. And Story and I often talk about in group how just the COVID and just everything that was going on has made this grief just come right to the surface, no matter how long ago it was. It's a dark time right now. I think everyone would say that, regardless of where you're at. It's a time of confusion, and so for kids who have just gone through a loss and who have gone through a loss even years ago, oftentimes this is coming up to the surface in our group support and the conversations that we're having. But I wanted to go to Story if we can, because she was one of the first Valerie's House kids ever that came into our doors 5 years ago, in January of 2016. And I'll kind of let her take it from here. She's also was a graduating senior this year, and had to face some things. And I will, Story, let you take it from here.
Hello, I'm Story. I lost my mom to cardiac arrest caused by pneumonia about 5 years ago, a little more than 5 years ago. And it's just, the whole pandemic caused a lot of, everything you were hearing left and right was talking about grief, talking about people dying from it was unavoidable. And typically that type of stuff isn't in your face every single day, everywhere you look. So when it all started, everyone was thrown off of their typical everyday routine, and there's no longer any security or safety nets that you could rely on. And that's what I really use to get through most of the time. So when this all started, it was just, everything was amplified because I was finishing up my senior year in high school, and I was trying to get through the last few things and try to make sure I could graduate and do all that and get to college. And it just wasn't, it was made so 10 times harder, having to now be made constantly aware of the dangerous situation we were put in. And then also my dad was working within the hospitals. So there was even more of a huge fear that he could be next, and that I could have no parents anymore. And luckily he's okay, and everyone in my family is okay. But it's just, every day was just being brought back to the feelings of, it's just like, it was the feelings of like, what's going to happen next? And how like alone is this going to be for me? It's just like every day that was like the constant in my thought, in my mind.
Has that settled down any over time, or is that still present?
I mean, as things started opening back up and somewhat went back to being more like in control, it's a bit more settled down, I would say. But at the same time, there's always that fear. I mean, my dad had like a small, like little, like itch in his throat, and it wasn't anything. And that this was a while ago, and everything was fine. But it's just the fear that could have been something so much worse. Really just kind of like snapped me back into reality of things could go wrong so quickly. And it's just, I mean, and it's every day there's not a day that goes by that I won't think of my mom. She's the first thought in the morning and the last thought at night. And it's just knowing how quickly things can go wrong. It's terrifying. And right now I'm just trying to, like, through Valerie's house, through some other outside help, through friends and family, I'm trying not to let those thoughts like consume me, because that's otherwise it's not a way to live.
Are you away at school?
I am doing I am fully remote. I'm learning from home. So
Okay.
I should
So
be
you're
at the
attending-
Boston, but I'm down here.
That's probably another layer of disappointment, not being able to be in Boston.
Yes.
What are you studying?
I am a freshman at Boston University, and I am majoring in psychology.
What do you want to do?
I want to be a clinical therapist. I want to have my own private practice and be able to help children and teens with like mental illness, with grief, basically everything that I've gone through in my life growing up, related to my mom, not related to my mom, knowing how it feels to have someone to talk to and have them genuinely listen back to you. It's probably one of the main reasons why I'm still alive. And it's something that I want to be able to give back to the community.
Can you talk a little bit about the thing with social media that we were talking about earlier, in terms of, you know, you're more you're a different demographic. What can you say about it?
I hate social media. So I will say something. I'm typically not very open about my life on any of the platforms. I would say the one that's like most like about me, I suppose, is Facebook, but I'm not active on it. But when it first happened, everyone, like my mom's page became like a memorial page, and like everyone like she knew like flooded the page with like condolences for the family, messages towards me, towards like my dad. Even though my mom and dad had been divorced since I was like 1 or 2, they were still very much in each other's lives, and everyone was just sending so much like love and support towards the family. And over the years, and like over the first year, people would post like pictures and like memories and like messages. And the past 5 years, that has definitely went down. I because it's like one of the ways that I can feel most connected to her, I do make a post every on like every Mother's Day, every year on the anniversary of her death, on her birthday, and then 1 or 2 here and there. And I'm the only one that does that anymore. And it's just kind of like how the documentary said, and like how other people have said too, over time it fades away for everyone else, but like the people like most affected by it, it doesn't go away, and it's like always still there. But you see all the other people who like after a year or so, it's like, okay, like moving on, like not really touching on the topic anymore.
You say you're a private person. Was it hard to go to Valerie's house for the first time and start that process?
Yes, my dad told me one day that we were going, and I did not want to go. I was 13. I heard the term group therapy and I didn't like it, but I went. And after the first meeting, I didn't say anything because I'm typically a very shy person, But after the first meeting, I left asking my dad if we could come back in 2 weeks. And that was 5 years ago. And I still go every single chance I can get. It has
And now
helped in ways I could never have even imagined receiving help. So
Do you talk to your friends who aren't people you know through Valerie's house about, your mom and stuff? Or is it mostly the friend group that you have through Valerie's house?
yes and no. I'm a very private person, like in real life and like through social media. I don't have many friends that I like talk to like outside, like about things like aside from school, but the ones that I keep like in my very close inner circle, they're all aware of like what happened with my mom. They know like how like I'm like a big like I'm very open about what happened. I love talking about her. I will talk about her all day. And it's hard to talk about it around my friends for the fact that it's not making me uncomfortable. It's a fear that I'm making them uncomfortable because it's what Angela said earlier. If you haven't like walked that same walk at some point, you don't understand exactly what the other person's saying. And it just makes you feel kind of in an awkward position because you don't know how to respond. And I fear that I'm going to make someone uncomfortable and they're just going to have to be sitting there not knowing what to say back to me because there is no response to say back. So it's just, I typically in detail, I'll talk, like if I have like something like really in detail wise, I'll talk about that with people in Valerie's house, but I don't keep it a secret from anybody. It's just, I try to filter what I say just for the fear of like making other people uncomfortable.
Can you share a favorite memory of your mom, and what's her name?
My mom's name is Summer, and there's so many, I can't even think of one, but something just like, I guess like a very like sweet and like repetitive memory. For most of, I would say 5th and 6th grade, every morning or almost every morning, before I woke up, she would go to Starbucks and get me a cream cheese bagel and a frappuccino, and then she would wake me up with that. And it's just and then like also every night, no matter what, she would always like tuck me in bed, even if I wasn't going to sleep. She would like kiss me goodnight and like just tell me like how much she loves me, and it was always reassuring. We never ended a night without making sure that the other person knew that we loved each other, and we always left on good terms. So
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Angela, we're going to pivot back to you. Got another question. Is it common to postpone grief? I lost my mother right before COVID lockdown and feel like I haven't been able to fully begin the grieving process. Excuse me. What can I do to start? My mother and I were extremely close.
Whenever you're ready, it's up to you. There's no couldas or shouldas or any of that. It's just feel it. That would be when you're ready to feel it. You have to feel it to get through it, to get to the other side. And there is another side, I promise you. But feel it and surround yourself with people that you can trust and that are going to be there and aren't going to try to fix it or give you advice, which oftentimes people want to make it better, and you can't. Just being there for your friend and for your family who is going through this and walking with them through it, wherever they're at in it. So you may just need to tell people, I'm having a hard time, but I want to feel this, and I want to get through this, and I need your help. And remember, what she would have wanted, as people say that, but it's what's kept me moving forward in my life. And most of the people that I talk to that grieve is that, and kids, even an 8-year-old will say, I know that my dad really wanted this for me. And, whatever it is, on their level, to finish the Lego set, like Jessica said, it's those things that keep you moving, because we live for them. They live through us. And that is very powerful.
Got another question. How can I, as a teacher, best support a student whose parent has died?
Maybe I'll let Story jump in on that, since she went back to school after her mom's death.
I mean, don't be super hard on the kid. They're going through something that, like, no one that young, no one in school should have to go through a death of a parent or loved one, and it takes a toll out of them. I lost my mom right after 7th grade, so when I went back to school for 8th grade, it was, at first I was in middle school and I had to battle out every middle school issue that comes up, because middle school is a terrible time for anyone. And it was different because it's everything, especially the first year, everything's new. I mean, taking your first test is still new because it's your first test you're taking without being able to, like, go home to your loved one or being dropped off at school by a loved one or something like that. But just as a teacher, let the kid know that if they ever want someone to talk to, that you're there. Even though most of the times I feel like kids won't talk to the teachers, but it's still good to know that there is someone there to support them, no matter like what time of the day it is, or it's just to know that there is someone there that they can talk to is what is just really needs to be known. And then it's just like, obviously, like, no one deserves like special treatment in a way of like letting them like slide, and like I don't want to like phrase it wrong, like poorly, which I fear I might, but mostly just letting them know that it's okay if they like need to go to the bathroom to cry, or if they need to go to the nurse's office to have a break, or that they have someone to talk to. And it's just not being super hard on them, especially like after the first month or after like the first like semester, because the grief doesn't stop with time. So it's just not, I would say the most important thing is just to make sure the kid knows that that they aren't like isolated out, and that they still are like very much like loved and appreciated, and that they have a place where they don't have to be afraid to go to school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to add to that too. I mean, if we could sum it all up with even what we're talking about today, is people really underestimate the impact of grief on a child. I don't think people really realize how much this impacts a child. They may not show it. It may come out in different ways. They are hurting just like you hurt as an adult. Please have compassion. Please always come from that perspective, especially if you didn't experience it as a child. Don't try to judge and try to put a child in a specific box of where they should be after a certain period of time. They're in such deep pain, they probably don't even realize the pain that they're in just yet. It's that devastating to lose a parent or a sibling or that other person in your life. You can't even put it into words. So as the people in a child's life, just care for them and have compassion. No, we don't want to make special rules and make the grief an excuse for a bad grade or a reason to not want anything out of life. It's more of a reason to want something big out of life, is to live for them. And we talk about that, and what has happened to us will make us stronger. But as the people in their life, please know that they've changed. Who you were before the person died, you are a different person forever now. And give that space to that family, that entire family unit. The entire family is, like Jessica said, flipped now. Compassion. Jessica, do you want to add, as a parent of a couple of kids who I know have gone back to school? I know you have one little one, but I think of your middle school child and some things that have helped your family.
Actually, they're all in school now. Skylar's in
good.
Kindergarten this year. Yeah, I would say as a parent, I notified all the teachers ahead of time. I spoke to the guidance counselor ahead of time, and we were also doing hospice counseling at the time. So we coordinated where the hospice counselor could come to the schools once or every week or every 2 weeks to just check on the kids and make sure they were okay. So at least even if the kids didn't know it, they had support within the school. And then most of the teachers were able to like let my children know, if you need a minute or you need to go to the bathroom or you need to step out in the hall, like they set up a code with them so that like instead of my son crying at his desk, he could be like banana, and then the teacher would be like, okay, you can go step into the hallway, and then he could take a minute for himself. Because it does come differently. Like get a paper back and you got to be on it instead of an A. And my middle schooler would be hysterical and angry and beat himself up, like just like not physically, but like mentally, tell himself he's not good enough and, he should be better. And their attitudes change. And so literally anything could be a trigger, or it's Father's Day next week and my kids are upset, or we're nearing the anniversary of their death and my kids are all on edge. And children don't understand what those emotions are. They just feel the feelings and they are trying to process them. So I would definitely say making sure that the people in the school know that they're aware, and yes, just having compassion. And I definitely don't use our grief as an excuse. However, as a parent who was obsessed with my kids doing well educationally, I could care less what their grades are. All I care about is that they're emotionally okay, and all of the rest is just noise.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica, we got a question from somebody asking, I don't know how easily you can answer this, but how different has the grief journey been for each of your children?
They've all responded to it differently. So I have a now 5-year-old, but at the time he was 3. He doesn't really understand it. Even his birthday was in July, and he asked me when Daddy was coming for the birthday party. And I had to, sit down with him and be like, remember, Daddy's not here anymore. Daddy died. And as kind of brash as that sounds, saying Daddy's in heaven or Daddy's an angel, it's very confusing at that age. And so I have to be very clear with him. And he was like, oh yeah, ha ha ha, and like ran off. And it was like the strangest thing. Whereas my 12-year-old son will get angry and immediately start crying, or will kind of isolate himself. My 9-year-old son gets mad, and so we bought a punching bag. And so when he's feeling his feelings are too much, he goes and uses the punching bag. So I have 5 kids, obviously, I said that before, but each of them kind of internalizes it differently. And depending on where we are in our grief journey, they're all going to change how they're responding.
One of the things that came up in the documentary was how we grow into different people, and so you will grieve differently over time as you become, a slightly different version of yourself. Does that make sense?
100%. That documentary spoke to me. I'm so happy that we have it as a resource. Yes, absolutely. I was a very angry, widow when my husband first died. I honestly, until about a couple months ago, I was angry at the world and I felt sorry for myself. And then something changed. And all of a sudden I realized I was wasting time that my husband doesn't have, being mad at the world. And I could either choose to waste away my time that I have on here, or I can live my life for my kids and for him as well. Like I could live it in a way that would be in honor of him. And so something just switched inside of me. With the kids, it's the same. We went from not wanting to leave the house and not wanting to be around people and crying and being sad all the time, to now they have friends and they socialize, and we look forward to going to Valerie's house. And so as much as I hate time, because I feel like that's what everybody tells you when somebody passes away is, oh, time heals all things, or some other cliche. Time really has changed the way that we're grieving, although we will always be grieving and we will always miss him, and it is very unfair. But I think now I realize I don't think life is fair. I think that you just, it's crap, and you just do the best that you can in all of it.
Story, can you reflect on what she was just talking about, or what we're talking about, over time, how you maybe approach your grief differently?
definitely the whole thing with time. I mean, time does not heal all wounds, but it does change how we see what happened and how we react. And definitely how I was within the first month of it happening and how I am now 5 years after it happened, I don't miss her any less and I don't think about her any less, but the pain isn't as overbearing all the time. Kind of going back into that documentary where the one lady who lost her son and her grandmother, how she said like a good day is being able to like make it through the day. And then but like some, like she cries every morning, but being able to like get up and like make her day or make it through her day, that's a good day. But sometimes she can't do that and you have to take like a personal day because it's just too much. That still happens. That will always happen. No matter how long ago you lost a person, there's still going to be days where it's not easy to get out of bed because the pain is too overwhelming. But I mean, I've been able to do so much more than I ever thought I would have been able to do within the first like 24 hours of hearing that she passed away. Because every single thought that passed through my mind about what's going to happen, how am I going to finish middle school, how am I going to finish high school, how am I going to go to college, stuff like, and then like beyond that, which I haven't reached yet, but I mean, I made it through all of that and I never thought I could. And the fact that I did because I took like the pain and the grief and I and then like how I knew that my mom would want me to continue living. I took that and used it and kind of said to myself that I wasn't going to let the grief and pain stop me from still continuing on with like what I wanted to do, because I know that would have just crushed my mom if I let it like consume me and just threw away all the potential that I had. And with time, I don't like the word becomes easier, because every day, some days are harder, some days are easier. But with time, it definitely has become less of a challenge to wake up every morning. And I mean, it's something that I'm going to live with every day for the rest of my life, but I'm able to see more good in the world and more good reasons to continue living and continue taking every day on as strong as I know my mom would have wanted me to. So
this might be a strange question, but are you an artist?
Sort of,
I was
yes.
just wondering if the flowers behind you were you or something you drew.
No. No, my art is a different style.
Okay. Angela, she mentioned the word, consuming you. One of the questions we got is, do counselors and trained grief practitioners ever feel that one's grieving is always healthy and can go on as long as the individual carries those sad feelings about their loved one, even if it's to a consuming point? In other words, is there a point at which, maybe you need to reassess?
I think we all know that out of grief can manifest into more serious, all-consuming ways of just stunting you in general, that not being able to move through it at all, not accepting it, not able to find a new meaning in your life, not able to, just that. Yes, grief can, not all grief, a lot of grief doesn't need a diagnosis. It doesn't need a professional. A lot of grief just needs friends and people that care and can listen without fixing it. Just listen and be genuine with their listening. But yes, grief can, and that would be up to the counselor to determine. That's very tough. We're still in the field of grief. And those who are even licensed in this field are still trying to work their way through how to treat it, because it's just so unique and so individual and so natural. It's such a part of being human. Do we need to erase it? We don't want to hide it. We know what happens when we hide it. When you stuff it, it turns into so many of our community's issues go back to grief. So many of them. With as an adult, when you're unable to grieve and you are trying to find another way of coping. It's because you didn't grieve. No one gave you the opportunity.
You you said you lost your mom a long time ago. Start by talking a little bit about what we were talking about seeing it through different lenses over time, but then also, why you started Valerie's House after all those years, and how has that changed your grief?
I didn't grieve for a decade at least. I mean, I've said this before. It wasn't until I went away to the University of Florida, 8 years after my mom's death, that I even said the word my mom died. I mean, I didn't, my dad remarried. I had an incredible stepmom and she filled the role in many ways and just pretended that it didn't happen. So that I don't think was healthy. I know it wasn't. But I don't ever want another child to have to go through that and the kind of pain that and what that did to just how that wears on you as a child, to feel like you can't be yourself and there's some sort of secret you're hiding or something's wrong with you. Or, my mom died in a car accident. She loved me till the day she died. I mean, and some kids don't even have that. Some kids don't know if their parent loved them. They question if they did. If they took their own life or if it was from drugs. That's a lot of times what children immediately ask. Why? Why wasn't I enough? And that's their journey that they have to face. And the first thing we do in Valerie's House when we get together is we say our name and who died. We've got to be able to say, I'm Angela, my mom died. Sometimes they'll say how, if they want. And some kids will say, my dad died from drugs. And it's power to be able to say that. It's the start of it all. So the way grief manifests and changes is just different for everyone. It really is. But of course I still miss her. When her 30-year anniversary hit, I cried like a baby. And I was like on the couch, here I am, Valerie's House, of this incredible program in her name. And I just said, why? We were robbed. And that's what we say to the kids. Every single one of them were. And you have to own that with someone when they've gone through it. You can't try to sugarcoat it. Just admit it. They were robbed. Now what? Now that's the big question. Now what are we going to do? And that's where you begin to plot out a future for yourself. And we help them as much as we can. And you can too. If you're a friend or a family member, you can do a lot more than you think you can.
What was the impetus for starting Valerie's House? Like to actually, make it a building that people go to and share their, loved ones?
A couple of things. I had a little girl in my life that I was mentoring whose mom had died, similar to mine. She was only 5. And I just cared so much about her. And I saw that she didn't know anyone else in school here in Fort Myers. I was just her like a big sister, just kind of spending some time with her. I specifically was looking for a little girl to mentor whose mom had died and her dad didn't have anything either. He was by himself, like Jessica, just a widower without someone. And so I knew that there had to be something more than what was available. And I had seen this concept in other communities. The first time I ever walked into a grief center was in West Palm Beach, and it was called Hearts and Hope in 2009. Patrice Austin was the CEO, and she shared everything she knew with me and said, this is how we do it here. And I remember crying then. And that was in 2009, and time wasn't right for me yet. But I remember I just thought, what would this have done for my family if I had this available to me? And then Dave, who's on this call, runs a center in Orlando called New Hope for Kids that's been around for 25, 30 years. These centers have been around for a very long time doing this kind of work on the ground with kids and families. We just didn't have anything here in my hometown.
Dave, are you still on the call? And if so, can you unmute yourself? I want to ask you a question.
Go for it.
So you've been doing this for, she said, quite a while. How has this world of helping children grieve changed over that time? That's probably a big question, but what would be your understanding of it, or how would you try to characterize that?
I think more people are becoming aware of what Angela said, of the deleterious effects death can have on children, other than just the immediate. The deleterious effects that don't show up for 30 years or 25 years. the relationship problems, the anger issues. Jessica mentioned about anger. That's number one emotion that's generated by grief. I got my introduction into this area when I worked in the prisons. About a third of the inmates in prisons are people that have been there because of a death in the family and got on the wrong path, and they end up in a correctional institution. I want to mention one other thing, a couple of things too. Just we try to stay aware of, and that's the word death. We don't use the word lost or passed away. It's a way to sugarcoat it. You can't do that with kids, because if kids, they hear it's lost, then when are we going to find it? We got to get a search and find them. So there's little things like that really have an impact on young people, because their minds are so small, as Andrew said, and as they grow, and that's why sometimes you have a whole different perspective on grief from the time you're 10 and when you're 18 or 19 years of age. You can have a kind of like a relapse. Let me share with the group here, it'll only take a minute or two, but I'm going to tell you a story that really had a profound impact on me back in 2006 when Hurricane Charlie came through the Orlando area here. And our facility there had a large block wall, and it was taken down by a tree branch, and it had to be rebuilt. And we got a contractor. He sent a block mason out, and the block mason was touring the area, and I was walking him around and showing him where he can get his water and his electricity, and if he needs to use any of the facilities in the house. And he popped a question to me. He says, "What goes on here?" And I'm 2 to 3 minutes into giving him an explanation of what went on at the center there. And he looks at me, and his eyes are all watering. He says, "Oh my God, if my wife only could have come to a place like this." And he was I don't remember his last name. His first name was Victor. He was an English guy. You could sure tell by his accent. And I said, "Victor, what are you talking about?" And he said, "Oh, it's been about 6 months now." He said, my wife's world just fell apart. I says, I don't understand. What do you mean your wife's world fell apart? He said, she didn't want to get out of bed. She didn't want to eat. She didn't want to get dressed. She didn't want to do anything. And this went on for a few weeks, and we finally discussed and said, we got to get some professional help. And he said, it's been about 8 weeks now. She got her diagnosis, and she's suffering from anxiety depression that's brought on by suppressed grief feelings from her mother's death when she was 12 years old that have now come to the surface. So here's someone, I don't know, Victor was probably in his early 60s. So, and I've had stories like that shared with me over the years, a lot of them, and Angela get those kind of stories as well as time goes on. But it just told me that we've really got to focus on these young people and get them back on the path to where they were prior to the family member death. You mentioned a little bit about suicide. We refer to suicide and homicide as complicated grief. There are a lot of issues. I can give you one example. A woman sends her husband to the store, the gas station kind of store late at night to get some milk, and he doesn't want to go, and she says, go. Well, he goes to get it, and what happens? He gets shot and he's killed. And all she thinks is, I forced him to go there, and I'm the cause of his death. One example of a suicide, homicide. In suicide cases, you get those, my dad committed suicide, am I going to commit suicide? Now the kids are thinking, are they going to commit suicide? So there's a lot of dynamics associated with grief within a family, and they're coming from, from all. We've seen every kind of death conceivable, and there's so many other issues that can be generated from a death as well. So many disruptions, people getting on drugs and alcohol, and adults, and one of the things I advise all the young widows that I get to know, I said, don't create one problem for another. She wants to go out and find another husband real quick, and I've seen cases where women have done that, and they alienate their kids. Their kids hate the new stepdad and that kind of thing. So there's a lot that we get involved with in a grief center, other than just for a couple hours a week, families coming, we're dealing with them 24/7.
Hmm.
I hope I didn't ramble on here too much.
No, that's okay. We do have to start sort of wrapping this up, but one
Yeah.
last question. You've been doing this for a long time. I described it as a grief avoidant society. Are we more or less grief avoidant now than when you got started?
No, I'd say no. There's um, more acknowledgement of grief. We get few families that don't want to get help for the whole family, and that's why we didn't talk a lot about it, but that's why you have the adults there at the center at the same time you got the kids, so you can move the entire family through this most difficult time in all of their lives. And there's a lot of other issues. Having an adult support counselor can refer families out to get help in other areas unrelated, directly related to grief. We need some help in family counseling there.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. Angela, I'm going to pass it back over to you. We're coming up to the end of the hour, and if anybody does have any more questions, go ahead and put them in, but I don't have any further questions that we've received. So do you want to, start some final thoughts, Angela?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you for everyone who took the time to talk about grief. It's the kind of stuff I talk about, all the time. I assume everyone wants to talk about it. Sometimes find myself on a Friday night having this over dinner conversation. A lot of people are not this comfortable with it, but you got to find some humor in it all too. Absolutely. Grief is generational. Let me be clear with that. If it's not dealt with now, it'll be dealt with down the line, and it'll be passed on from one kid to their kids and to their kids. As Dave said, someone in their 60s and 70s still feeling it, inability to raise their own children, relationships, all of it. Let's help kids and families when we can, and that's when they're ready. You can help by walking with people through it, asking about memories. You saw Jessica and Story light up just to be able to share something. Very few people bring up the loved one after they're gone. And Story said to me earlier, she goes, Angela, sometimes not saying anything is worse than saying something and messing up. So bring up the person. Don't be afraid to do that, even if that makes the other person choke up a little bit. It's out of respect and it's out of love, that they will never be forgotten.
Can you share a memory of your mom?
Yeah, just a great mom. Story and I bond over that. We lucked out. We lucked out for the years we had them. Yeah, tucking me into bed, big dreams for me, a lot of confidence I have because of my mom. Even in just 10 years, she was able to do that. So don't underestimate the power of 8 to 10 years and what a parent can do for a child or a sibling or a loved one. Short period of time, even in their life, can make a significant difference on that child.
I'm just going to read a couple last comments here. Jen says, thank you to WGCU and Valerie's House for this discussion and making us aware of the documentary. Anne, who's running behind the scenes, says that we'll post a recording of this discussion online and then she'll send a link to everyone out there. But that is pretty much the end. Angela Melvin is founder and CEO of Valerie's House. Angela, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Mike, for hosting this.
And thanks
Thank
also
you, Jessica, Story, everyone. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica Schuchard and Story McDougall for sharing your stories as well. Like I said, if you haven't seen the documentary, you can watch it online at speakinggrief.org. And if you didn't hear today's Gulf Coast Life radio show, when we talked about the Grieve, Love, Heal podcast that they're making there at Valerie's House, you can find it on our website, wgcu.org/GCL. And for all of us here at WGCU, thank you all so much for participating in this great discussion.
Thank you.